Hi there, I'm Representative Becca White, and I serve the town of Hartford, and I'm here with Representative Jim Masland and Representative Russell Muirhead from Hanover, and you're joining us for our second ever episode of Common Ground, which is a show meant to discuss the two different political bodies in Vermont and New Hampshire and all the local and state level political goings-on and how it's relevant to you, because it impacts all of us. So today we've got Representative Muirhead here with us, and we're going to spend some time talking about Vermont and New Hampshire and our two legislative bodies. And that's my intro. Do we want to kick it off?
Well, let me go next, Becca. We're both citizen legislatures. Sometimes we're called the Twin States, although there are obvious differences. And I am enthralled to learn more about how the New Hampshire House works, your general court, where you have 400 representatives. We only have 150. And so I think that's an advantage because we can get to know each other. And I'd like you to tell us, Russ, how on earth you work with 399 colleagues and how you get your work done, because you do get work done. It's a challenge from the outside looking in.
Yeah, and I'm just learning, I'm just beginning to understand it myself, because I'm in the second year of my first term. And the first year of my first term was spent, largely meeting remotely, or at least in committee meeting remotely. The Republican majority wouldn't allow the legislature as a whole to meet remotely. So we used to meet in like indoor sports centers, but we were spread out, and it was really awkward. And so we had this whole first year where we really didn't, especially newcomers like me, didn't get to meet people. And the legislature was as mysterious to me after the first year as it was before I served in it. So I'm only now beginning to see how things work in the State House. And I'm not sure that 400 is that significantly different for political people. So a lot, what interests me and what I notice is that though it is a citizen legislature, everybody in it decides to run. And these are almost all people. They're people who like people. Some of them are conservative, some of them are liberals, some of them. Yeah, but they just tend to like people. And so they're people who remember other people's names. They're interested in other people. So it's actually, I feel like I've gotten to know 150 already, and getting to know the next, the rest of them isn't going to take that long. And we're all good at remembering each other, and everyone likes conversations. So, so it's very sociable. And then there's also the fact that in the New Hampshire legislature, every bill does get to the floor. So the leadership can't keep a bill from hitting the floor. And every bill gets discussed if there's any disagreement about it at all. A lot of bills will get passed on what we call the consent calendar. If there's unanimous support in the committees, and the committees recommend for them or against them, unanimously or almost unanimously, they might get put on the consent calendar. But anybody can take them off that calendar, at which point they're debated. So every bill gets the chance for a pro argument and against argument. Many people can sign up to speak on a bill as wish to. But there's at least one on each side. And then there's what we call a parliamentary inquiry, which is really a way of getting in a little bit of an argument in the form of a fake question. If I thought this bill was really great for humanity, would I press the green button to pass it? That kind of question. So everybody gets to make a couple arguments about every bill, and that means that I get to hear lots of different legislators talk on the floor, and get to know them that way, even if I haven't been able to meet them in person.
And when you started your first year, you were saying it was like all on Zoom, or was all online?
The committee work was happening remotely.
Okay. Because for us, we were completely on Zoom the last full year and even into the start of the session.
Right.
And what was interesting is we still actually have that hybrid model now. And it was very difficult to get to know people because we had so many new representatives who, I'm in my second term. Jim, you're in your 12th term.
Cool.
So you've got the real institutional knowledge here, but it was quite a wild year for us.
Yeah, it really was.
Well, I'm fascinated to hear that every bill gets its spot in the sun, so to speak.
Yeah,
because,
isn't that cool? Yeah.
Because there are a number of bills in Vermont that literally don't go anywhere.
They stay on the wall.
Some of them get combined with other bills, and that's good. They're similar subject or something the committee really wants to get into. But there are some bills that go absolutely nowhere at all. I don't know that we have the time, that's what I would say, to go through bills really completely and do them justice. But sometimes there are political considerations. A committee chair may not want something or other.
Right. Right.
And so it doesn't get any time. And there's a few bills that I've introduced a number of sessions, biennium, and will likely again, because they haven't gotten anywhere, because there's one having to do with child custody, where we think, some of us think the New Hampshire system of dealing with parents who are disputing custody if they approach a divorce, your system is better than ours. And I haven't been able to persuade certain people to take a good hard look at what you do in New Hampshire. The committee in question has been busy with other things. They're not twiddling their thumbs or anything like that, but we haven't had a decent debate on something that I think is very important for parents when their kids are at stake.
Yeah. And if you're, I think it is still the case that if there's a bill that only has 2 or 3 or one supporter, it's not going to get much of a hearing.
Okay.
But it does get some hearing, and that one person gets the chance to make the case. First of all, before the committee. So every bill gets a hearing in a committee.
And how many bills? So we had a situation in the last 2 bienniums where we have legislative counsel who, we don't draft the bills. I assume it's the same there. And we then dealt with a situation where we had 1 or 2 individuals who were requesting a ton of bills, like hundreds of bill requests.
Oh, interesting.
Compared to the average person, probably, I asked for probably 10 maximum,
Well, that would 10 would keep you very busy.
Yeah, and so how many?
1 can keep you busy.
Yeah.
Doing one right can keep you busy. I mean, I think
For
I do
years.
notice, like there are people who introduce a lot of bills, but they don't do justice to their own bills. And it takes a lot of work to really do justice to a bill, even if you know it's not going to pass, to make the argument in the most forceful way, because maybe in the next session you can pass it.
Had a couple of bills that Becca and I have seen that much of it has been findings, which has been essentially a very long editorial.
Yeah.
Right.
And not that much substance to the bill. And as Becca was saying, it is a burden on Ledge Council
Yeah.
because they're exceptionally dedicated.
Yeah.
Whatever we ask for, they'll do it.
Well, it's so interesting. So there are certain norms that make anything work that you can't codify, and people people can decide to abuse those norms, and they can, stop an institution from functioning. So I guess, it could happen to us that somebody comes in and starts introducing 200 bills, most of which are symbolic, most of which are about the findings and not about the actual. And that would also, I think, stress out our already overworked legislative services staff.
Oh, you call them legislative services.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just a little different.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will call them legislative staff. Yeah, ledge
Yeah.
council. And we have a joint
And
fiscal
and the
office.
capacity of the whole legislature, I mean, our institutional capacity as an institution that's meant to stand up to the governor, as a separate branch, depends on that those legislative services professionals, maybe more than anything else.
And,
We have another group, we'll call them Joint Fiscal Office. I presume you have something, the bean
Yeah.
counters.
Yeah.
But they're more than that. They're extremely proficient in providing fiscal analysis,
Well, here's
what
another thing
things
I've
will
noticed,
cost.
Jim, especially with respect to fiscal issues, ways and means and finance,
Oh, okay.
taxing and spending. What I've noticed is that, well, first of all, it takes a subset of really, really devoted, really capable legislators to make
Same
those
here,
committees work.
and ways and means right here.
And those are ultra full-time, committees. And it also takes some veterans, some long-time, people who have really served for a long time and become real experts. And so we have 400 people in the legislature, but we have a smaller number of people who've served there for a long time. And they tend to be, both on the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, some of the most impressive people in the legislature. And maybe they're impressive because they worked there for a long time, but they're the ones
I mean, we don't know about over here.
I mean, there are always exceptions.
There's always exceptions.
No, Jim really does an incredible job on ways and means.
So the
It's-
veterans make the institution work. And
Yeah, well, as I describe myself in Ways and Means as a middle bencher.
no.
I mean, I'm certainly not a
You're
backbencher.
not in leadership, but you're not a backbencher.
But I don't try to run the show.
Yeah.
But one of the fascinating things about Ways and Means towards the end of the session is anything that has a tax or a fee, some bill that came from whatever committee gets dumped into Ways and Means, and so that we have to become proficient. We have to learn what the subject matter is before we can pass judgment on it, and that is we work up to the last day. I mean, without any doubt, and I find that absolutely fascinating.
And you know my colleague Sharon Nordgren, who's she's really this ultra expert who served on in both the majority and the minority in finance, and she has been there for, I'm going to say, approaching 32 years. And she's the sort of really, really intelligent, really tough, and really, really warm person who makes the institution work. Without that, I don't know that we would really be able to do our constitutional job.
I think I may have mentioned in the previous first segment we did that I've had college classmates from across the country come and sit with us in committee. And when we're trying to work through a bill, they find it difficult to figure out who's a Republican and who's a Democrat in committee. We get out on the floor and we make our partisan arguments, and that's fine. That's part of the show, I guess you could say. And it's necessary to say it. But it's fascinating when in many of our committees, people are there, as you've just described in the House in New Hampshire, people are there to try to solve a problem or to resolve a question. And you can't do that, in our experience, by being ultra-partisan. It doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, that's really great to hear. I mean, I think that's the challenge, both in my experience in the committee I serve on, which is election law.
Wow.
And also, I would even more generalize more grandly to the country. This is the challenge. It's appropriate that we disagree. I mean, under conditions of freedom, people will disagree, and there will be groupings like conservatives and liberals and other groups, and it's serious. It's high stakes. And when you're in the middle of a disagreement, it's passionate. And when you lose a disagreement, it cuts deep. Yeah. And so it's not a game.
No.
It's for real. It's for the real world that we're fighting. But there are so many occasions where the disagreement needs to recede, and we need to work together. So I really wanted to run for the legislature because I was interested in the problems that were affecting election law. I had written this book about conspiratorial thinking in American politics.
Should have had it right here.
What was I thinking?
I know.
This is a chance to sell the book. It's got a great cover too.
Yes.
We're coming back.
Bring it,
We're coming. Next week's about the book.
Yes.
And the book is about conspiratorial thinking, and I wrote it with a co-author named Nancy Rosenblum, and we wrote it just as Trump. We started writing it just as Trump entered the presidential race. We didn't think he'd get the nomination. We didn't think he'd win. We didn't think he'd be president. But we, so we were really interested in the phenomenon. We didn't think that it would move into the White House with Donald Trump. But we did, in the conclusion of the book, speculate about the possibility that a president might refuse to concede after losing an election, citing a rigged election conspiracy. And when we were writing this out, we said to each other, we can't put that in the book. It sounds too crazy. It's too extreme. People are going to think we've lost our bearings. And we went back and forth and we said, well, let's put it in the book, but we'll qualify it and say, because we really honestly didn't think it would happen. But we were following the logic of things to that place. And then it happened. And so I started really worrying about the state of election law and the kinds of new threats that are coming, that are coming to the field, which used to be a fairly technical and unexciting area of law. And sure enough, like for instance, we had a public hearing on a bill this winter, which is meant to, I think still coming up for a vote, it's meant to eradicate the machine counting of ballots and impose hand counting of ballots. And you see some similar bills around the country.
So you would only have hand counting of ballots?
Only hand counting.
Oh, as someone who's been through a recount, the stress, we had our machine counting and then we had the by hand counting. It came out the same numbers. But the stress that like my former librarian from my elementary school and like the parent of an ex-boyfriend, like in this small room counting these ballots, like it was high stress.
You're in Nashua.
And that's just a local election.
60,000 ballots. And the machine, is going to have the count ready an hour after the polls close.
Sure.
But a hand count is going to take 3 weeks.
Completely.
And the kinds of errors that can be introduced over 3 weeks, and the kind of outside pressure that can be brought to bear, the corruption that could be introduced. And so the actual way to make sure that our elections are not, have no integrity and aren't reliable is to pass a bill like this. So anyway, it's getting more difficult to just do the technical work that needs to be done to make elections free and fair, and that's because of this. I don't want to call it partisan pressure, because it's not really partisan. It's I don't really feel like Donald Trump's rigged election coalition is, properly speaking, the Republican Party.
Oh, I hear what you're saying.
It's maybe a group that's trying to take over the Republican Party, but I don't think, and I hope that it hasn't happened yet.
When we still counted all our ballots by hand in town hall, I enjoyed counting ballots when I wasn't on the ballot myself, of course. Because we'd have coffee and donuts and sit, around a table from each other, one Republican, one Democrat, kind of stuff. And it was at that point, Becca, it was very casual.
Yeah, it was.
But it was, everything's on the table. You could see every single thing.
Yeah.
And so those days have passed, I guess you'd say,
Right.
Yeah, you see
And the other,
videos,
big thing out there is the attack on ballot access, and the effort to make accessing the ballot more difficult, under the guise of trying to ensure that elections have integrity, and to guard against voter fraud. Sure. But in point of fact, we haven't been able to identify any large-scale voter fraud and voter impersonation voter fraud, where I go to the polls and I say, I'm Karen Leott Hill. I'm here to vote.
Oh, you look a little different.
I know. I mean, that kind of voter fraud is. There's a little bit of it, tiny little bit, sometimes. But we're making the ballot more and more difficult for low resource citizens to access, for citizens who are transient, who don't have really reliable permanent addresses. They're sleeping on their friend's couch this month, then their friend gets evicted and they move in with in their sister's basement next month, and their address moves around a little bit, and it's getting harder and harder for those sorts of people, harder and harder for older people who have to use absentee ballots, harder and harder for younger people who move a lot to access the ballot. And I'll tell you, what I really worry about is, and this here I'll speak as a Democrat if you don't mind, but I really worry about my opponents as Republicans giving up on the project of building a big majority that can win elections, and trying to win elections by making sure the other side doesn't get to vote. On the margin, disenfranchising a few people here and there, so you kind of win by just a little bit. And if I were to look over across the aisle at the Republicans, I'd think to myself, like, that's not the way Ronald Reagan was. Ronald Reagan was, I'm going to win elections, and he won 49 states when he ran for re-election. And he didn't have to disenfranchise a few people, a 0.25% or something. And what's really happened since 2000, the year 2000 in American politics, is that two parties have just kept tying elections. We tied the 2000 presidential election. As you know, if like Al Gore had won New Hampshire, he wouldn't have needed Florida. That's how close that election was. And and right now the Senate's Democratic, but only because the vice president can break the tie. The 50th senator you could think of as the New Hampshire junior Senator Maggie Hassan, who won by just a little over 1,000 votes in 2016. So the game is like, how can we make sure those 1,000 votes, come to our side or don't get to the polls or whatever? Instead, I think both parties really have to ask themselves, how do we create a durable governing majority, which is a big majority? How do we persuade lots and lots of people that we have the right public philosophy, that we have the right program, that we can be trusted? And that's what democracy is really about. It's not about disenfranchising people or making the ballot hard to access.
And I feel like one of the unique things about Vermont in particular that I've picked up on just in the last 4 years is that we actually, I feel like we have that conversation all the time with our colleagues, which is not what is each individual party attempting to do, but what are we trying to come together on, and what will move the ball forward for Vermont. And when I was growing up, I had this vision of politics as something that's like seedy and nasty and like only corrupty, wealthy, old white guys were doing it.
Yeah.
So what's so incredible to see being involved in government, and it sounds like this is your experience as well, is there are good people who want to make a difference, and we still have to protect the system to make sure that there isn't the ability for people with bad intent or who are doing it for money or doing it for power or what have you, getting in and infiltrating and just moving the needle into a place where they hold an ultimate power that doesn't represent the majority of people. But I was intrigued by your point you were making around the conspiratorial thinking, because something that we've dealt with in Vermont is the fact that we have had mail ballots. Like everyone got mailed a ballot during COVID-19. And there was a big push to do that again. But we heard, at least there were like some letters to the editors and stuff like that seemed to kind of hint at that was more likely to be fraudulent. And that was surprising to me, because I'm in favor of universal vote by mail if it's affordable and doable.
Well, it's very, very easy to verify.
They've done it in Oregon for quite a while now, and it works very, very well. So
I know. And it's very easy to validate the ballots that come back. So people worry that if you don't validate them when you before you mail them out fully and completely, then there's a ballot out there that could be used.
In the ether.
Yeah, but you could actually sprinkle ballots all over town, and it's not going to introduce any unreliability or fraud or lack of integrity, because you verify each ballot when they come in.
That's correct.
And so there's nothing. I mean, it used to be from 1965 when we passed the Voting Rights Act, and that's when the United States of America decided finally that it was important to enfranchise the entire citizenry, even if they were African American.
Heck yeah.
For 100 years prior to that, it was like, well, we only want to enfranchise the old white guy. But 1965, Lyndon Johnson, and the Republicans largely passed that bill, and from 1965 to 1998, which is the passage of the Motor Voter Act, which allowed people to register to vote when they got their driver's licenses.
Oh yeah, we have.
The whole purpose of American politics was to make access to the ballot more, easy for people. And to increase voter turnout. And the problem was perceived to be low voter turnout. And after the tide election of 2000, a lot of people got to think, oh no, now we need to figure out how to keep people from getting to the ballot. And it all changed after that. And that's when the voter fraud got going.
Well, you're very well versed on this.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
A good resource.
Yeah, and
Many further discussions. Maybe we could talk.
Nobody calls me a good resource. Thank you very much.
A great resource. Maybe one of the things we could talk about a bit, I get a little exercised under the collar, but on the deterioration of public debate these days, through media, through all the stuff that we're bombarded with on a daily basis in our inboxes, that debase the debate to the point where it has very little content, in my opinion. It's the same nasty argument over and over again, and I don't know to what extent your inbox is overflowing with this kind of stuff. Mine certainly.
We don't have staff.
Me.
No,
Okay.
all kinds of stuff, and of course, it's a challenge to sort out just what to read. But for the people who maybe don't have the time we have, even if we don't have any time at all, the people who are busy with their day jobs or the kids or whatever they are constantly bombarded with stuff. If I just use my own word, it'd be a lot of phony baloney, and try to decide how to evaluate candidates for office, which arguments have validity, which don't. That in itself is quite fatiguing, just trying to sort that out. And it, I could go so far as to say it's appalling. Although I do reading from time to time on different stages in American history. I'm just 2/3 of the way made through Chernoff, is that his name? Book on General Grant.
Oh,
U.S. Grant.
they had a thing on VPR about that.
And during Reconstruction, during Grant's second term, the divisiveness,
that was
violence,
that was an
murder,
ultra-partisan moment.
in
in
you're
Louisiana,
a professor of government, just
Mississippi.
I am. You could call me professor.
Oh, professor.
Anyway, it's appalling what was happening then. But then when people decry what's going on these days in various parts of the country, I could say, you know, this happened before.
Yeah.
And it was appalling then, and it's appalling now. Somehow we managed to get through it. I personally am an optimist, get up in the morning and say, we'll get through it this time. But it requires work.
Yeah,
It's not just something that we can kind of wait to heal itself. It requires work on all of our good natures to try to make sense and meddle, for lack of a better word, meddle through.
Yeah.
You know, save the day or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how we're doing
Well,
with regards to our dialogue here, but I'm fascinated to hear how hard you guys work in your house as we do.
Yeah.
And it is, it's, I guess, if we could pat each other on the back, it's a clear indication of dedication, you know, in these two states and many other states that we haven't had the time to dig into.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, you know, citizen legislation. So a number of things there. I mean, one is with respect to debate. I think you're absolutely right. You know, the task in politics is not just about coming together. It's about learning how to disagree.
Yeah.
You know, constructively, productively, and in a way that sustains what you call the system, constitutional democracy, the framework for disagreement. Because if once you destroy that, you don't get to keep disagreeing anymore.
No.
And so that requires, you know, norms of civility.
Yeah,
And those are
Mason's
definitely
rules.
being stressed right now.
Yeah.
And norms of accuracy. And as you said, you know, I think with the new media, it's really easy for misinformation to propagate, and it's really hard to, I agree, like I'll try to educate myself on particular issues, specific things that having to do with New Hampshire politics, and it's hard, it's really hard to know what sources to trust and to know who's reliable, but who's got a point of view, and who's actually going to try to mislead you. It takes a lot of work, too much work, even for a government professor who's and you know, and the last thing is it takes, you know, citizenship. It takes a devotion to the country that's bigger than even your devotion to your cause. As you said, care for the system.
Yeah.
You have to always have one eye looking at the system, and be ready to step in and support it.
Well, I feel like that's actually the perfect.
And I hate to use the word system. I'd sort of use the. I'd rather use the word constitution than system, because system sounds very.
System.
Yeah, I would use the word constitution. You know, constitutional democracy requires people who care about it, not just about their. I mean, I care a lot about my partisan cause, because I think it'd make the country better. But you have to care more about the Constitution
itself.
than you do about.
Earlier mentors in this place, in this job before I was elected, I think I was a select person in Thetford, and we were working on an issue discussing basically what's the role of government, small-time government, I guess you could say, or big time. And he said, I think quite correctly, it's not government's job to solve all the problems, but it is our place to convene a forum where people of different viewpoints can come together and work on intractable problems. I mean, that's a good, from one perspective, that's government's role.
I feel like that was the perfect way to end, because the whole point of this Common Ground show is to be a forum for all possible guest legislators. So thank you, Representative
Oh, right on. Thank you for
Muirhead.
having me. And I also love that definition, so I think it is a great place to end. Yeah.
And if there's time on the tape,
Yeah, there you go.
as I think I said last time, people who watch our show, who may have problems, who can somehow get them to CATV, to us, perhaps to bring up at another show. This is intended to be an open discussion amongst us, but also it's not limited to just us.
Yes, completely. Well,
Anyway,
thank you both.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
talk again.
Cool. Well, thanks for watching.